Great. Well, hello, everyone. My name is or TSPA. We're a nonprofit supporting the global community of people working in online trust and safety. And because we're a professional association, we're interested, of course, in supporting our existing professionals, but we're also committed to bringing people into the field for the first time. We really want this to be a career choice that people consider and really plan for and prepare for. And that's part of why we are doing this Careers AMA series. It's a chance for you to get your direct questions answered about what's it like working in trust and safety? How can I prepare for a trust and safety career? We have three panelists today who are going to be sharing about their journeys and sort of how they found themselves in trust and safety and answering your questions. Now, I will say we did our first one of these AMAs last year. It was wonderfully attended. Some of you in the audience, I think, may have been in that one as well. We do expect we have some new folks in the audience this time around because of the layoffs that we've been experiencing in the tech sector. As you can imagine, layoffs are a really tough step for companies to take. They're really hard on teams, especially tight-knit teams that work really closely together. And that's what trust and safety teams are. And so for the folks who have been laid off from trust and safety teams in particular, this is a really painful time. We're really sorry if you're joining us because you've been laid off. It's wonderful to have you here, but we're really sorry about the circumstances. We do have some resources for you that we're going to talk about at the end of this session. One thing we really know about this field and the way that it's grown over the last couple decades is that there is always a need for our work. There is always a need for our expertise. The road can be bumpy in life and in trust and safety, but if you are looking to stay in this field, we are confident that you will get to, and we are here to help you. So with that, we're going to our session today. This is the Careers AMA, Trust and Safety Careers, Ask Me Anything. We do have our Q&A box open. Please do use that to ask your questions to our speakers. We'll be answering some sort of in the chat. We'll be answering some live. And with that, I will turn it over to our hosts, Jerrel, and our guests, Michelle and Harsha, to introduce themselves a little and start answering some questions.
Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here and to be on the panel, Michelle and Harsha. My name is Jerrel. I've been in trust and safety for about 9 years now, 8 or 9 years. Time really flies by. Excited to be here to answer questions that folks have, but then also to share a bit more about what the experience has been like and what it looks like on the day-to-day. And I'm really excited for Michelle and Harsha to share a bit more about how they approach this work too. So some folks may have seen our bios, but I think the first question or the question that I get asked a lot is, how did you get into this job, or how did you get into trust and safety? And it's not always in like a shady way, like a why you? Like, why are you doing this work? But more like just how? Or did you major in trust and safety in college, in undergrad? Imagine if there was a degree years ago. And so to kind of introduce and kick this off, I'd love to hear, maybe we'll start with Michelle, like, what's your story? How did you get started in this work? How did you learn about TNS? And what kind of brings you here today? And then we'll switch to Harsha after that.
Sure, thanks, Jerrel. Again, I'm Michelle Toborowski. Before I get into how I adventured into trust and safety, my background briefly is I started in US federal government work. I was an analyst for about 12 years covering geopolitical issues and political profiling, I guess you could say. I moved over to trust and safety and the tech industry in 2019. I became a member of YouTube's, at the time, newly growing intelligence team. And we'll talk a little bit more about what these different terms can mean a little bit later. I was there for about 3 years until last summer, where I really got my feet wet in the industry. And then I moved over this year, well, last year now, about 6 months ago, to Roblox, where I'm currently working on the moderation intelligence team. I got into trust and safety basically because I was looking to break out of what I was feeling a little bit stifled in the government bureaucracy, was looking to do something different, but also was looking to move, frankly. I was based in the DC area, wanted to be closer to family out on the West Coast. So going into a new sector and getting to use my skills in a new way to serve the public, but also getting the opportunity to, relocate. These were both really interesting things to me. And I talked to a lot of people who I know are interested in those as well. And I did want to kind of offer a couple thoughts on what I think is really helpful, but I'm not sure if we want to maybe just jump over to Harsha first and get her background before we do that.
Yeah, good call. Harsha, let's do a formal introduction in your background and bio, and then we can answer the question.
Hi, everyone. It's really good to be here. I'm Harsha, and I worked in trust and safety for almost a little over 10 years now. And I spent the majority of my career working in trust and safety. I started in India, I moved to Ireland. I'm currently based in California. And I should say I've really been growing up along with the industry. And the way I got into this field is that I randomly one day got an email saying that, they're looking for, someone to fill in a 6-month contract role to work at a tech company. And that's all the background I knew. But I started as a contingent worker, focusing primarily on content moderation and trends analysis. And then over the last 10 years, I worked in different roles and teams, primarily focusing on policy, enforcement, operations, and to some extent partnerships. I'm currently a part of the governance team at Meta, where I'm leading strategic initiatives, focusing on both growth and efficiency of the oversight board. But yeah, like I'm sure many of my colleagues will relate to this. I got into trust and safety by accident, but I think getting into tech was something I always knew I was going to do, because I started my career in a technology and management consultancy firm. I did that for less than a year before I took on the trust and safety role. Yeah.
That's really helpful. And I feel like just what you said about accidentally falling into work is totally my story too. Tech was not on my radar at all, and definitely wasn't trust and safety. It wasn't until I started meeting folks and feel like I found my people and my community in this work, and it was a positive surprise. And so you started to hint a bit more about like, how did you get into this and where you start? I'd love to go back to Michelle and hear a bit more about that. How did you learn about TNS? Did someone tell you? Did your friend show a board to you, right? Did you moderate content in the past? And then also, if you want to share a bit more, what strategies did you use to actually get the job and get in the door?
Yeah, that's a great question, because again, although I was a little more strategic, I think, at aiming for trust and safety jobs, it wasn't where I was thinking to go at first. Initially, I was thinking, I guess I'm a government employee. That's what I'll do the rest of my life. But there were actually a lot of other government folks who had left either federal or state government, or people I had contact with who said, there's a lot of interesting work out here in this sector. And as I mentioned, it was really important to me that I was still able to find work where I felt like I was doing something that really mattered. And that's one thing I love about trust and safety. And the more I talked to people who had left my organization or others and, gotten into these types of roles, the more I thought this is actually really interesting work and something that I would love to do. I think I would offer kind of a couple general thoughts based on my experience now that I'm a couple years into people who are looking to either leave mid-career and do something in this field, like if you're coming from somewhere else, or even if you're earlier in the career. I think one thing that's really important with trust and safety, this is a big and growing sector of what trust and safety encompasses. And that's part of why TSPA exists now. It didn't exist a couple years ago when I was coming in here and when most of us joined. And that's awesome. This is great. But think about like what appeals to you about it. Like when people reach out to me for advice on things like LinkedIn, saying, I really want to get into trust and safety. How can I do that? I ask them, what about trust and safety interests you? Are you interested in the moderation space, the operation space? We can talk more about what this means, but they often don't really know. And I understand that part of that is you're still figuring that out. But I think looking at the job descriptions that are out there can help and things like that. So think a little bit about what actually really interests you about it. Also, I would say think about matching your skills to the jobs that are out there. Some people will, discuss with me, here's what I love doing the most. And that might be an aspect of your job that you're really good at. And make sure you see how you can match that up to what you're seeing in openings. And people who you can reach out to through mentoring, whether it's TSPA's mentoring or people that you find just discussing reaching out on LinkedIn, I think people can kind of help you finesse that. Think about what really matters to you. The other thing I would mention is networking is really important. It worked well for me. I think people being in this session right now is great. I consider this, important networking, even if we're talking through a panel. But also think about being very focused with your networking. I think if you just reach out to someone at maybe a company you're interested in and say, hey, I would love to work where you are. Is there something that you like, or is there a job I could do? That isn't something people can necessarily help you with as much. I think if you come to them and say, hey, I'm really interested in openings in trust and safety and operations at your company. Here's a role that I thought was really interesting. Can you talk to me a little bit about what it's like and the culture there? That's something that is really, I think, a good way to do it. So those are some tips I would offer just off the top.
Also, I would add to, I think, Michelle, you made a really good point. Like the way I got into trust and safety was by accident, but I think the reason I remained for this long was definitely intentional. And I think that goes back to, like I would, plus one Michelle's point about really think about your why, like why this matters to you and where do you see yourself in the long term and how trust and safety helps you with that long-term vision that you have for yourself. Because I think that's important, not just to get your foot in the door, but I feel like even if you think about long-term growth within the industry, and many more questions we'll be discussing today about how and what, I feel like there's no one right answer to anything. And for you to be able to pick what's the right answer for you, you should really know your why. So I'd really encourage anyone who's aspiring to get into the field to spend some time to think about your why. Yeah.
And I just want to underscore that why piece. So I've interviewed folks for my team and other teams and stakeholders that we collaborate with. And it's funny now, but I'm at Spotify, and a lot of times we say, well, why trust and safety, or why do you want to join this work? And folks are like, oh, I love music. And I'm like, yes, but everybody loves music, and everybody says that. And not that that's a bad thing. Music is great, and I'm so glad that so many people like music. I think the challenge is our work is sometimes thankless. We're behind the scenes. We don't always get credit for our work, or having to advocate for resources in different spaces. And so a lot of times people who are successful a long time have some kind of intrinsic investment, whether it's like Michelle said, having a big impact, right? Or wanting to keep kids safe, or wanting to keep people safe, or helping people understand what it means to be in these online spaces and their privacy rights, et cetera. I would encourage people to kind of dig deep and think about that and what your connection is, because that'll set you apart as a candidate when you're interviewing and talking to hiring managers, but it'll also help sustain you if you encounter challenges in your role. The other thing I think that Michelle touched on too, that I think would be a good segue for us, is a lot of times when people ask, well, like, how can I leverage my skills, et cetera? It might be helpful for folks to know that TNS teams are made up of lots of different kinds of teams. And I remember when I first got into tech, I was so concerned about not being able to code or not knowing how these complex systems work. And then you get there and it's like, oh, most TNS teams have a policy team that is responsible for policy development and research and writing and partnerships. TNS teams also have the enforcement folks, so the people who actually look at the content and make enforcement decisions. They also have, in some cases, algorithmic integrity teams who are assessing what is the impact of the algorithms and how do they work, and are they equitable, and are they biased. And so there's lots of research and data analytics roles here too. And then my tried and true friends who are project and program managers. There's so much space for that too, and what we call like keeping the lights on kinds of functions. How do we demonstrate our impact? How do we track our KRs, objectives, deliverables? There's space for everyone. So kind of double clicking on to have an idea of what you want to do and have a perspective on why it matters to you, but then to Michelle's point as well, also be thinking about what specific roles are relevant to you and your experience, and then kind of go from there. So building off of that, we'll start with Harsha. I'd love, in your opinion, what's the #1 skill you think anyone who's new to TNS should have to be successful? Yeah, love your thoughts on that.
I would say definitely being able to work with people in the sense, very often, whichever role you pick, right? Either even if you go for technical specialization roles like data scientist or software engineering, or if you're going for more general role like program manager or project manager, whichever role or whichever team you pick, I feel like the most intrinsic inherent part of it is working with different groups of people who have different interests and incentives. They're all working towards a common goal, which is related to, either safety for a specific problem or whatever that is. But being able to work with these different set of interests and incentives, I think that's the most important skill, even if you're going for, even if you're applying for a more technical role. And I think depending on the level of role you're picking and depending on the stage of your career, taking this one step ahead, I would say, is your ability to bring people together and make sure that they're working towards that common goal. So either are you able to work with people in a group setting, or are you able to bring people together and get something done while there is potentially some conflict and interests and values, priorities. Yeah.
Michelle, what about you?
I would second that wholeheartedly, not just because they're very important skills what Harsha just went through, but because honestly, those are the people we want to work with. And like she was saying, you're going to be working with very different people, particularly in some of the roles I've had. You may be working with people who have a very engineered data mindset, and you come from a very liberal arts background. Being able to cross that divide of how you both think and communicate with each other to solve problems is very important. The one other thing I'd say, which sounds like it's a counter to that, but being able to have both of these skills and use them simultaneously, is the ability to own your role. This is something that, particularly coming from government, while we had people who also do that and do it very well, it was something that was very expected of me to be independent in a way that I think was not necessarily a surprise, but it's expected of you everywhere. And to be able to be given maybe a broad problem and say, this is your overall portfolio. How do we fix it? Like, figure out a way to fix it. You figure out who to talk to, figure out who to work with. That's something that I think is expected in most orgs, most companies in this field. And maybe you won't know which resources to use. Maybe you'll have to figure out how to build the tools you need. Maybe you'll have to figure out who to talk to even get the data you need. I think that's a really exciting thing about this job and this industry, but I think that's something people might not expect sometimes coming into it from the outside. But if that's something that appeals to you, you're gonna love that here.
100%, and definitely agree wholeheartedly with those recommendations. The only thing I would add is influence too. A lot of times trust and safety teams at various companies don't have the power to say no, right? We engage with product managers and data scientists and others. And they're like, we want to do this really, really cool thing that our users are going to love. And in trust and safety, we're like, oh my God, that is so scary. That is so dangerous. How are people going to understand this? Like, that's the space that we sit in. People are going to exploit it. And often it's about how do you engage them, but how do you also get them to make your issue their issue? And a lot of success I've seen is not necessarily organizations doing what I tell them to do, but very senior PMs and engineers parroting our concerns. Like, hey, we're going to launch this amazing thing. Here are some of the things we are thinking about to ensure we're building trust. And I'm like, we want, because we've influenced you to be more thoughtful about it. And so I would encourage folks, if they're going to take courses or things that could be helpful, brushing up on some of the very many courses and information that's out there related to influence and being influential over others and systems, I think could be really helpful too. I want to get into some of these questions. I feel like they're related. We've got a question here from someone who shared that they were serving as a police officer currently in the UK. And so they're very interested in trust and safety roles. And I think they would be great because they have an investigations background. And so the question is, how would I advertise myself better when applying for TNS roles? And are there particular jobs within TNS where investigation skills could be helpful? And I'm looking at you, Michelle. I'd love to hear your thoughts and kind of reflections on that.
So yes, there are specific jobs in trust and safety where investigation skills are very helpful. And they often will bring in people from both the type of job that the investigator or the question asker is asking, people who are former targeters in government. This tends to be jobs that I know people are asking about job titles. I will say with job titles, they can vary sometimes between companies, but you may see them with an intelligence type of title. You may see them with an investigator type of title. Those are some ways I've seen them. But essentially, those will be people who are sometimes focused on looking for sometimes the worst of the worst on the platform. Sometimes whether it's, child safety issues or people who do things like that. There's definitely a skill set that is very valued here, particularly if you're used to doing it in a technical environment and have a background with understanding things like digital signatures and things like that. They will obviously vary from company to company, but I think one thing to focus on there, and this is kind of getting back to the original thing we talked about, is if that's a particular skill set that you really want to leverage in your work, I would focus on that as you're, seeking to market yourself.
Harsha, any reflections on that?
No, I think that plus what Michelle said. Also, I feel like investigation, like the way you can talk about your role, because it involves critical thinking, it involves dealing with, a network of malicious actors. I think all of it is very relevant to either targeted investigative roles, or even if you're applying for roles as, operations analyst or specialist roles. I know it's tricky with job titles, but I feel like there's definitely behaviors that you can draw from your current role and map them to job descriptions, especially within, investigations, threat intelligence, and operations teams.
Yeah, I would say, I think that especially for people with non-traditional backgrounds who are trying to break in, the translation is incredibly important. And so I started my career as a social worker. And again, tech was not on my radar, and I switched to public policy. But when I was ready to start interviewing for tech and TNS roles, I had the same question. Well, how do I take my experience and make it make sense to a hiring manager or a team? And some of the things that Harsha brought up around like the collaborative nature around this work, I spent a lot of time talking about how in public policy and in social work, there are limited resources, right? And the way you get success is through the relationships and the coalitions that you build. So I focused a lot on that. I focused a lot on the power piece. And lots of times we don't create the systems and structures that children and families find themselves living within, but we have to help them navigate it and still be successful. So I leaned in a lot on that. So I would encourage folks to think about the things they've heard so far and how does that directly relate to your job so you can speak to it. I think the other kind of nail in the coffin for people sometimes when they try to get in is well, you don't have tech experience, and how do you explain that? And that's the question that kind of would keep me up at night. But I think the kernel of truth in there is hiring managers and recruiters are trying to see, have you thought about what it would mean to be in this space? And so I would encourage folks to think about, like, if you get that question, it's like, no, I don't have tech experience, but I'm very comfortable working in fast-paced environments. Here's what I've done. I'm very comfortable building coalitions and working with stakeholders to achieve goals. I'm very comfortable in ambiguity. A lot of the challenges we see, there's no right answer, right? How can you talk about those things and move yourself forward? Really, really important. Other questions that we have here, and kind of switching gears a little bit, is how do people grow in these roles? Like, where do you get into TNS and you just do that until the end? Do people move on? I think the answer is yes, but I'd love to hear, maybe Harsha, you start on your kind of assessment of what this question of, like, what do you do once you're already in there? Where do you go?
I think I think as a very meta, like high level point, I feel like growth is quite personal and subjective. And I think that's where I think it's really important to think about your why and your long-term vision for yourself. And I've seen examples of, multiple types of growth. Either you're growing in the sense that you're taking on more responsibilities, moving on to more challenging roles, because the beauty of trust and safety, I think, is that it's an evolving field. So there are more new teams and new roles coming up. So either you're moving on that way in a, as an IC and taking on more responsibilities, or you're going the traditional path of, getting into managing people and growing in that direction of, taking on more responsibilities, but from a management perspective. And I've also seen examples where people, jumped from changed companies or moving on to startups or setting up something on your own even. And lately, I think if you're someone who's had a few years of experience, you can even explore options of independent consulting using your expertise. I think this is a good time to explore that as a growth option. So yeah, I think there's no single answer on what growth looks like, but I think we're in a very interesting time where you have a lot more options. Either if you want to stay within a company, or if you want to maybe join public sector or start something on your own, I think there are many options.
Michelle, what about you? What are your thoughts and your experience as it relates to growth in these roles?
So since my trust and safety career has in itself not been that long, I've only been here for a couple of years since I was elsewhere for 12. Before that, I am also really unsure where I will be like 5-10 years from now. But I think that's part of what I love about this industry. I've joined organizations like TSPA and other orgs because I love seeing what other people are doing. I've started to understand just in the past couple of years of my work, what I really love doing within this field. For example, like I've now on my second team that is fairly new doing the type of work I do. And I really enjoy setting up teams that do this work. And I apologize if you can hear my cat, he's my secretary. But I enjoy doing this type of work. I enjoy setting up new teams. This might be something I take elsewhere. But I think there's so much you can do. People are doing work in academia. People are doing work that supports the industry more broadly. I think also if you want to do things that are similar to trust and safety, but maybe in other parts of the company. I know people at other companies who have gone into things like public policy, which is more of the like working with governments and like providing the link between governments and your company. Based on the experience they did. That may not be a route I want to take, but there's other things in the industry you can do based on what you learn from trust and safety as well. But it seems like the sky's the limit. So
100%. That's been my experience too. I have a lot of friends who started in trust and safety, either on a policy team or doing operations, and then moved to product management. Because I think one of the ways, at least in my experience, to be really successful at policy work and policy writing is to have a strong understanding of how the platform works. And for folks who are kind of figuring out they want to branch or they want to help build things, they go into product management. They definitely may go or stay and continue in operations, right? Or they go to government and academia as well. What's so interesting about this moment is because moderation is part of the public discourse in very major ways for lots of reasons that we don't have to get into on this call, lots of people are thinking about it and aware. Whereas 10 years ago, if you're like, oh, I've got all this trust and safety experience, hire me at your nonprofit, they'd be like, well, what does that even mean? And so people have a conception of it now. So I do agree the sky's the limit. On a practical level, some of the things I share with some of the mentees who are doing this work, who could reach out to me, is there's very practical ways you can grow in your career too. And I usually see it as like 3 paths. One of them is like this SME or subject matter expertise. And so I call them like the rock star ICs. They've been doing it for a long time and they know child safety like the back of their hand, or they know abuse and harassment really, really well and how it manifests on the gaming platforms, the video platform, the social media platforms, etc. That's a thing. You can just continue to grow in your career, hop from company to company. And whenever you see a role that's like, we need a child safety expert, you're like, pick me. I'm one of the handful of folks in this industry who know this work really, really well. So some people are like, I really want to do that and just get really, really good at one thing. Other people like myself are like, I want to be a people manager. I think the way I have the most impact is I grow folks. I coach and I mentor them. I get them excited about this work, and then they go off and do great work elsewhere. And so there's the people manager route, which I think at a lot of companies is much more spelled out HR has already bought in and thinking about how management supports and how you grow people in that direction. And I think the other pathway that I usually see are folks who are experts but want to do the external facing things. And so people who want to get on panels and talk, people who want to present their work at conferences or join communities or join organizations like TSPA and volunteer their information. There's space for that too. And I think for some folks who are like, I really like doing good work, but I like telling, I like talking, my strengths are engaging with others, there's pathways for that too within your role as well.
Also, one thing I'll add to that, I think when I think about growth, I think the most important thing is the relevance of the industry that we're in. And I feel like trust and safety as an industry I feel like that relevance is going to continue for medium to long term at least. And I think as long as the relevance aspect is there, I feel like to your point, sky is the limit. And I think the good thing about today is the ecosystem of trust and safety has expanded so much that you're not like you have a lot more options just outside the traditional tech companies who are on the front line. You have a lot more options around that in the ecosystem. Yeah.
Fantastic. One of the other questions that we have, or maybe an observation before a question, is this user mentioned it seems employers favor experience in the abuse category. So the example they gave was CSAM or child sexual abuse material, self-harm and suicide, and terrorism. What is your advice for folks who don't have that experience?
I can talk about this because I didn't have it coming in. Oh, well, I should say I didn't come in for a specific role with that specific background. I think there's a couple ways to look at this. There is definite value in some of these skills. Like I've worked with people who come in with some of that expertise in things like child safety, because maybe they worked at, a nonprofit that dealt with those issues, or they maybe come from the government with specific experience on working violent extremism or hate groups or something. And that's definitely valued. But I personally have worked on a lot of abuse areas where I did not have personal experience and I learned it on the job. And I think in a lot of cases, this is kind of going back to what we talked about on the beginning. There are some very general skills that are really useful to have in this field that being able to learn on the job and show that you can do some of that, like work well with others and own a field, that is the kind of thing that will help. Like I was able to sell myself as coming from my government job. I learned a lot about areas that I didn't know and became a subject matter expertise on those within like 2 years. So being able to use that kind of expertise, which wasn't specific, but showed that I had the capability to learn, that's helpful too. The other thing is there are some very specific subject matter expertise jobs, but going into some of the other types of roles, there are jobs in things like operations management. There's a lot of people who are doing things like managing how our moderation operations work at a lot of these companies, things like that. Sometimes moderating, maybe contractor workforces, things like that. Just basically, as Jerrel, I think you said something like keeping the lights on. That definitely does not need subject matter expertise in abuse areas. You will gain it as you work, but what you would want to demonstrate for those roles is broader skills in just being able to get the job done, whether it be managing or other project management, things like that. So while those can be helpful, not every job is looking for that type of specific work experience.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the specific roles you're looking for too. Like, because I think to summarize, I think if you have all these other skill sets about, working with people, collaboration, ambiguity, problem solving, I think then this becomes one of the important factors and not the only factor. And even if you're able to demonstrate your understanding of that space by, I don't know, one thing I think about in these scenarios is that there is also opportunities if you're someone who likes to write, like let's say if you pick a topic on misinformation, are you able to read about misinformation, gather your thoughts and write something on a blog of your own? I feel like that's also a very indirect way to demonstrate that you understand the space, especially if you're looking for roles where that expertise becomes a priority factor. But yeah, to summarize, I think it really depends on the role, and I think you can demonstrate that you're ready for it even without that experience.
Yeah, so I would say the TLDR is you don't really need to be an abuse expert to land a job in trust and safety. There are so many other kinds of jobs and so many other kinds of roles. Sorry, but then also so many other kinds of areas of expertise that you can have in this space too. And I think we talked earlier around like getting out there and talking to people. I think folks would be surprised at kind of what happens behind the scenes. I want to switch gears a little bit. Charlotte mentioned this in the opener, but I love for the panelists to reflect on like the current economic climate and where we are. So we're all aware of the layoffs that are happening across the tech sector, and it's impacting trust and safety in some ways. And so we have another question that's like with the recent economic climate, we're seeing lots of companies concerned about recessions and cutting costs. Are we seeing an impact of that on companies' willingness to invest more in trust and safety functions? If you all have thoughts on that.
Harsha, do you want to?
Well, I'm happy to start too, while you both think. I think for me, I would say it varies company by company. Lots of companies have actually doubled down in this time because they've seen how important trust and safety and getting these things right are to their bottom line. And many of them are keeping the commitments that they had already, again, for that same reason, because they see the impact of it. At least that's what I've been hearing from folks. That said, other companies have been hit really, really hard for the trust and safety people. And I feel like the last 2 months have just been, at least for me, one-on-ones and letting folks know what's happening at my company, other companies I engage with, what to look for, where to go. And so I would say it varies depending on where you are, what the impact is. That said, I'll tie it back to a point I made earlier. In most cases, trust and safety teams are operating with limited resources and budgets. And I say limited, but I want folks to also think about that in a tech concept. So limited maybe compared to some of the other budgets that the companies invest in, whether it relates to their marketing, right, or their partnerships. Our budgets usually don't look like that, or the big fun sales trips that companies do. Our budgets don't look like that. It's still a lot of money. And so in most cases, we are already operating with the understanding that we have to be efficient. We have to always be demonstrating the value of our work. And so I don't think the recession or economic climate has changed that, because we are always starting there. What I would say though, maybe we get to this a little bit later, is the strategy for how you land a job during this moment and how you keep a job during this moment may be different or relevant. And Harsha, I saw you nodding your head too, so I encourage you to jump in.
No, I think I agree that I would focus. One, I think, yes, it really depends from company to company. And I think personally, I feel like it's hard to predict in terms of where things will land. But I think the best thing, even I'm focusing something as an individual, is how do I make sure that, or how do you make sure that you're optimizing your time to get the experience through other avenues while you're looking for a full-time job? I think that's the best approach I'd encourage you to think about. Is going back to my point about how the ecosystem's expanding today. You have opportunities to either volunteer, let's say, with organizations like TSPA or Integrity Institute. There are a bunch of these spaces that are coming up. So can you explore those avenues in the meantime, or even maybe starting a blog of your own just to write opinion pieces about what you're reading? So that way you're optimizing your time while we wait for the market to recover or opportunities to open up.
Yeah, and I think kind of going on what Jerrel was saying, if you are currently employed, those of us who are lucky, I think Harsha's right. You can't really predict what's going to happen, and you can't spend all your time worrying about it. The best thing you can do is just really, this sounds very trite, but focus on the work you're doing and do it to the best of your ability. Make yourself as integral as possible. And even with all that, there's no guarantees. I mean, that is one thing. If you are somebody who's on this call right now and you are considering leaving the government, that is one pro in the government's favor. There is definitely the stability here. I'm still very happy with the path I've taken, but yeah, I think it's unpredictable and you can only do the best you can. But I will say that having this community, and I did see TSPA, as Charlotte mentioned, as soon as we started seeing a lot of these significant layoffs, jumped right in with all the resources they could offer. And I really appreciate that. So.
Yeah, +1 to what's been shared, particularly for the folks who are in these roles and trying to figure out how to maintain their job and make themselves useful. For the folks who are looking to get in during this moment, I would just recommend the informational interview route. A lot of times when you see a role posted, they want like so might say policy specialist, right? Which I'll say is pretty general. The specialist part lets you know that that's in most cases like an entry level role as opposed to policy manager. A little tip for you all, and it'll say the years of experience, but like specialist, manager, senior, of course, in front of it implies more time, etc. But I think the folks who are trying to come in, sometimes when you see these roles that sound very generic, there's actually something specific that they are looking for. And I remember we put a role up, I want to say 2 years ago, and it was a specialist kind of role, but we knew we wanted someone specific with children and families expertise. And you would not have really known that unless you spoke to someone internally. And so to make sure you're being targeted and using your resources the best, I would encourage you, LinkedIn is your friend. Reach out to folks. You don't need everybody to respond, but you really only need one person. And I found success in a note that's like, hey, I'm so-and-so, I saw a specific role, I linked to that role. I think I would be a good fit because of XYZ. I've got 6 years of experience. I've done this. I'm really passionate about your mission, etc. Would you be open to doing an informal coffee with me? And like I said, some folks are like, no, stranger danger, right? Or I don't know if you've gotten as far as reasons for reaching out, but you really only need 1 or 2 people to help you better understand what they are looking for so that you can tailor your response and your approach to that role. Or you can say, that's not me. I'll move on and put my energy elsewhere too. I want to maybe switch a little bit and talk about mental health. We have a couple questions coming in. One says, can you talk about the mental health impacts of your role? There's a lot of news regarding this type of job and the impacts on workers at lower levels at these companies. And so I'd love to hear from the panelists. What's your reflection on that? How do you sustain yourself in this work, and how has that changed over time?
I think from my personal experience, I think self-awareness is really key here when it comes to mental health and sustaining that over time as you work through these, really complex and tough problems. Like knowing when it's the right time to, and it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy to know or immediately. It's not like there's a bulb that goes on which tells you need to take some time off or whatever that is. I think knowing when to step back or knowing how to prioritize various things that are on your plate, I feel like that that becomes a lot more important, especially as you grow within this field. So that's been very helpful for me too as an individual, is knowing, okay, like these are my priorities right now. And also, like I like to think about this analogy sometimes is like, I feel like, especially, when you think about doctors, I feel like there are sometimes if a doctor is going to surgery, there are a lot of challenging situations surrounding them. Like it could be how the patient's families, coping through situations, or there are a lot of unpleasant things they have to see when performing the surgery. But I feel like during all those times, there's a certain, I think, equanimity of mind that they maintain because for them to be able to perform the surgery in an accurate way. I feel like a lot of the jobs within trust and safety are similar to that, is that you have to be able to maintain that to go through your priorities and goals in an objective way. So yeah, like I feel like if I have to say one keyword, that's self-awareness. And of course, there's community like TSPA or teams within whichever company you're working on. And there are also many options that companies offer in terms of support and resiliency. Yeah.
I think that was a really great reflection on a lot of this. I think following up on that, one thing I'd say is you may not realize until you're working on certain things what really gets to you, like what really bothers you. Like I think we all think of certain things like some CSAM as some of the worst things you could possibly see on like a video platform or things like that. And that's definitely true. But I think you may come across things you didn't even know existed in some of these spaces when you're working in trust and safety. And that is where it is, I think, sometimes harder to be self-aware. So definitely, I think that's a great phrase. I think making sure I think watching out for the others that we work with is also important. Sometimes it's challenging if you don't work on a team. I'm lucky enough that I have, so we can kind of keep an eye on, that person I think is getting a little very embedded in the work that they're doing. I wonder if I should suggest that they maybe take a break or something, because they seem really concerned about how they're being very affected by it. The other aspect I would say is in some trust and safety roles, you may have the opportunity to work with, building or improving tools, particularly that maybe like a broader contractor workforce might use. And I've been happy to see there's a lot of discussion about how can we improve tools so that everyone in our organization uses these in a way that is the least damaging, if that makes sense, in a way that is the most I'm not sure the word I'm looking for, but how can we build this process to allow us to moderate content that makes it the least painful? Which I really appreciate that. And I think it is incumbent on all of us in trust and safety to continue that and make sure we're calling out, hey, can we make this process better so that maybe we don't have to see this or so-and-so doesn't have to hear this? I think that's also really important, and we all kind of have to support each other on continuing to do that.
Yeah, Michelle, I think the word, or at least the word that we use, is psychologically safe tools. And so particularly for the enforcement and ops folks who are reviewing video, that was one of the big topics that I've supported at the various companies that I've worked at, where it's like, well, yes, we have to look at this video, but should it autoplay? Probably not. Should it be grayed and you kind of hover over it to see it? Should it have audio? You have to maybe enable the audio so that folks can engage with really challenging content in their own way and kind of opt in. And then I take those lessons and apply that to features as well. Like, are users opting into this experience? Are you forcing them to have to engage or make themselves public in a way that they don't expect? But I think something else related to the self-care part is for people who do this kind of work, and I imagine it's probably similar for like firefighters, so that's the analogy that comes to mind for me. It's like, yes, you run and do the fires, but are you checking to see if it burns your suit, right? Are you checking if you burned your hand in your face? And as Harsha said, in a moment, you're not always there. And so checking in on yourself, checking in on others is incredibly important. And then also taking advantage of the resources that are internal. Many companies are already thinking about this, and at least trust and safety teams that I've worked on have had outside contractors who come and do group and individual therapy in an anonymous way. And so I think also getting past the stigma of saying like, well, I can't do it. I think there's pressure for us to always show up and make it seem like what's really highly emotional work doesn't faze us, but we're all people. In many cases, we are implicated in the things that are happening in the world that we're having to moderate. It is okay to have healthy boundaries and let your team know what are some of your lines there, or lean on the resources that are available to you to get the support you need, because we want folks around and able to do this. And what my mentor usually says is like, make sure you're filling your cup. You can't help anyone else. You cannot fill their cup if your cup is empty too. So do the things that you need to do that help you stay focused.
Put your oxygen mask on first and then help others is the other one.
Cool. We've got a few other questions in here that I wanted to answer. Maybe let's go to this question around what are some of the popular organizations and groups that you're part of in the TNS space? Or is there certain volunteer work other than policy work that can transition or translate those skills to the TNS area?
I would throw out, I've recently joined the Integrity Institute, which is another great organization. If you aren't interested in joining them yet, or you're thinking about it, they have a lot of great work published online. But yeah, I mean, there's so much good stuff I'm still going through on the TSPA website, which, by the way, somebody also has a question about systemizing process and getting the company's buy-in. I think a lot of the work that TSPA and orgs like this are doing to put together, like, here's a group of people from different companies who put together a working group to lay out a white paper on how best practices for doing this and that. I think that can also support some of the work you might be trying to do in those spaces.
I would say I'm mainly a part of TSPA, but I would say definitely Integrity Institute. There is also, I think, digital trust and safety partnerships, All Tech is Human. I feel like there are a bunch of these organizations where you could engage in some way as a volunteer or part-time.
Cool. We've got another question here too, and I think it might be our last, depending on how we go. Someone mentioned that after following their passion and making career change in TNS a year ago, they now find themselves looking for a new role in a very competitive market. Do you have any advice for staying in TNS or any suggested adjacent industry or roles that will allow them to easily get back into TNS when the right opportunity comes along? I feel like, Michelle, you started talking about this a little bit, how you move in and out, or maybe some of the adjacent roles. So maybe you want to start a response to this one.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, the competitive market, not much to be done about that, which is really unfortunate. But I think we were saying earlier, this is not a space that's going away. I think really focusing on what your specific skills are, being very targeted about here's what I can offer. If you have that investigative background, focusing on that. Another thing we didn't talk about, but I think is really important if you're coming from outside the industry, it's very important in most companies that you are able to show measurably your success in the past. So I think when you can show that up front, like on a resume, or if you're coming from another company and you already have trust and safety experience, being able to show you can already speak to that and show your results and success that way is already going to be like an initial hurdle. So I think that will get you over some people who maybe aren't able to show that yet. I know those aren't maybe the most golden pieces of advice to get you right through the door, but I wish you all the best of luck because I know this is a challenging space. So
the other thing I would say is there are lots of adjacent roles. And so we had mentioned early on that everything we do is inherently cross-functional. And so I can write an amazing policy, right? A content policy, but I cannot build anything. So it doesn't matter if my policy looks great, if you can't enforce it, if no one knows about it, right? That kind of thing too. And so we work with lots of stakeholders to be successful in this work. Some of the stakeholders we work most closely with are legal. Obviously, I think a lot of folks who join TNS have a humanities or in some cases a legal background. And so there's like product counsel roles for folks who have a legal background trying to figure out how they can get in. We work really closely with product counsel to advise on the development of new features. There's policy comms. So the folks who do the communications externally, in some cases internally, that talk about safety and trust and safety principles generally. There's also like the public policy or government affairs folks. And in many cases, the big companies have safety related government affairs people who talk to governments and NGOs about our work and why it matters and advise on legislation. So there are lots of TNS adjacent roles, and I've seen people go back and forth in each place. But then again, we also said many times there are so many different kinds of teams in trust and safety too. And I've always found that really encouraging when I think about my friends who are like, I want to do this work, it's so important, but I don't know how. Having to remind them, like, yes, it's a tech company. The majority of employees are technical and engineering and data and research based, but the rest of the teams that support this business have a lot of different skills and experience and interests. So of course, best of luck. And with that, I turn it over to Charlotte to close us out.
So I was like lurking in here at the end, my face appears. People are like, oh, I guess it's time to wrap this thing up. Thank you so much to the three of you, Harsha, Michelle, Jerrel, for joining us today, for leading this amazing conversation. Thank you to everyone who joined us to ask questions live. Thank you if you're joining us on YouTube in the middle of the night because you can't sleep. You're thinking about your career. I hope not, but if that's you, thanks for being here. I do want to highlight a few resources just as we close out here. We do have our careers page at TSPA. It's tspa.org/careers. That's not our career listings. That's information about a career in trust and safety. It's an FAQ that a bunch of volunteers here at TSPA put together that talks through questions like, what kinds of skills do I need? How can I highlight my experience that's transferable? If you're sort of sitting here wondering further questions, that's a great page to get you started. There's also links there to past sessions we've done about careers, so you can watch those, catch up on those. I did mention at the beginning of the session that we have some resources for folks who have been laid off specifically. The first thing I'll mention is we now have a program called Trust and Safety Coffee Hours. If you go to our website, tspa.org, you just hover over the Explore option, and there's a little thing that says TNS Coffee Hours. I'll put the link in the show notes. We have about 50 hosts right now who are trust and safety professionals. They are really excited to talk with people about their career conundrums. A bunch of them are volunteering specifically to help people who have been laid off. So if that is you, do go ahead and book time with our Coffee Hours hosts. They are delightful to chat with, and they are really here to help you out. The second thing is, if you are a member of TSPA and you have been laid off, you are eligible for a free 1-year extension of your membership benefits. So you can continue to be a member of the community, do all your networking, come to the events, and you don't have to worry about your membership dues. So if that is you, we have a form that you can fill out to let us know. If you email membership@tspa.org, we can get you started on that. With that, I'll say thank you all of you for being here. Wonderful to have you involved with the community. We couldn't do the work that we do without your support, not just, of course, if you're coming from a corporate supporter, thanks, but really from the community who participate in the programming, who share their time and their expertise and their wisdom with everyone. So thank you so much. Have a happy Valentine's Day, and we'll see you next time.